She was a respected civic leader, a tough and uncompromising freedom fighter, and staunch advocate for human and civil rights. An award-winning black journalist who was also a kind and caring woman who proudly wielded the sword of the black press for the betterment of her community.
For those of us in this room, I remind you that there is power in the black press.
Mary Alice Jervay Thatch, the third-generation publisher-editor of North Carolina's oldest African-American newspaper, the Wilmington Journal in Wilmington, North Carolina. For 25 years, she believed that the mission of the black press was to tell truth to power, and she did so without fear or favor, fighting against racist, social, and economic injustices on the pages of her newspaper. The daughter of Thomas C. Jervay Sr., the founder-publisher of the Wilmington Journal, which was first published as the Cape Fear Journal in 1927 by his father, Printer R.S. Jervay, Miss Thatch deeply believed in the legacy that her father left behind and that she proudly continued.
He loved what he did. And because of that, I think he was very, very successful. Not only did he love what he was doing, he loved the community that he was working for. And the community knew that. The black community loved my father because he was committed. He was genuine. All the news without fear or favor. That was the motto created in 1927, and once again, it is still the motto, and people knew this. There were some folk, of course, who didn't like him, but it really didn't matter to him because he fought for what was right. He fought for human rights, and there was never a challenge that was too big for him. And if he had to do it by himself, he did it by himself.
Miss Thatch was committed to the Journal being a voice for Wilmington's African-American community, especially after Wilmington's first black newspaper, the Daily Record, the country's only daily black newspaper over a century earlier, was burned to the ground on the same street where the Wilmington Journal would later be located by white supremacists in November of 1898. Because they wanted to silence the black voice. 75 years later, in June 1973, the Wilmington Journal was also firebombed by a white supremacist. But Thomas Jervay did not allow that to stop him from publishing his paper, and Miss Thatch drew strength from his determination and commitment.
My daddy was very, very plain. You're not going to run me out of town. I'm here to stay. I was born here and I'm not going anywhere. And what he was referring to was the fact that Mr. Manley had been run out of town in 1898.
The Journal became a target in 1973 because it advocated for the innocence of the Wilmington 10. 9 black males and 1 white female, led by the Reverend Benjamin Chavis, who were wrongly convicted of torching a white-owned grocery store in February 1971 and firing weapons on law enforcement and firefighters. The case drew worldwide attention. The 10 were all sentenced to over 280 years in prison, serving some of that time. Years later, under great pressure, then Governor Jim Hunt looked into the case and decided,
I cannot and I will not pardon these defendants.
But Hunt did shorten their sentences. The Wilmington 10 were free.
Hey, Dad. Hello. How you doing? Okay.
But there was a legal catch. A federal appeals court overturned their convictions in 1980. But because the state of North Carolina would not retry them, the 10 were still considered legally guilty of crimes they did not commit.
In February of 2011, we commemorated the 40th anniversary of the Wilmington 10. The city of Wilmington issued a letter of apology.
I think it is appropriate that the city of Wilmington recognize this moment in our history. The people that were taken into custody and eventually tried were done an injustice, a tremendous injustice by our judicial system. But it was a very tough time in our community, and I think it's only appropriate that we recognize those folks and apologize to those folks for the injustice that was done to them during this time in 1971. There were some very tough times here.
There was an article in a local paper that had a headline that read something like, the journey is over. I can't remember the exact words. And the next day, Ben Kojo, Reverend Leon White, met with me at the Wilmington Journal. And we were talking about what happened and some feeling that the journey was over and that the apology was enough. And I made the statement that the journey is not over. An apology is just a start. I said, let me see what I can do, but I'm going to have to take it to someone who's much bigger than I am. I got on the telephone and I called who at that time was the chair of NNPA's foundation, Dorothy LaVille. I served as secretary at that time of the foundation of NNPA. And I told Dorothy about the conversation that we had. That was in February. And in March, during Black Press Week, we made the official announcement 1 month later that NNPA would take on the task of seeking a pardon of innocence for the Wilmington 10.
But at that March 2011 National Newspaper Publishers Association Press Week meeting, before introducing Wilmington 10 leader Reverend Benjamin Chavis, Ms. Thatch made sure that her fellow black publishers understood the tremendous challenge the black press faced in seeking justice. She made clear that her now deceased father, Thomas Jervay Sr., fought for freedom in a Wilmington that had a tortured racial history.
I need to tell you about the city from which I come. That city is Wilmington, North Carolina. It is imperative that I give you some history because our speaker in February 1971, 40 years ago, came to Wilmington on a special assignment from the Commission for Racial Justice. He came to assist African American students who were experiencing much mistreatment and discrimination in the newly integrated school system. When given that assignment, I'm not sure how much our speaker knew about the sordid history of a city that is the birthplace of Jim Crow in North Carolina. I am not sure how much he knew about that city that is the only municipality in America that was overthrown by white supremacists. This happened in 1898. I am not sure when he entered Wilmington via the bridge over the Cape Fear River that many have said ran red from the blood of our ancestors in November of 1898. I am not sure if he had been told that the families of those who were responsible for 1898 were still controlling Wilmington with the same plantation mentality. I am not sure if he knew that the black press was burned in 1898 and the editor Alex Manley and others were banned from the city. I am not sure if he had any notion that history would repeat itself. My father, the late Thomas C. Jervay, gave our speaker and other young people involved in the struggle a place in the Wilmington Journal to express themselves. My father served as a mentor to many young people. The doors of the journal were always open for discussion and advice. So in June of 1973, white supremacists once again tried to silence the voice of the Black community by bombing our community newspaper. Our speaker and my father had not long left that building. Before the bombing, our speaker and 9 other young brave warriors were indicted on several charges, which will be covered by our speaker, and were eventually and unjustly found guilty. These innocent freedom fighters were soon called the Wilmington 10. I take this opportunity, Ben, to say thank you for crossing that bridge in February of 1971. You came to try to make Wilmington a better place for us, our children, grandchildren, and future generations. I send out a call today around the country and in this room asking that you help us repay the Wilmington 10, in what I call a very small way. For those of us in this room, I remind you that there is power in the Black press. I have given you 2 examples of how the mainstream fears us. They use violence to try to take away our right to freedom of the press. We must continue to use it and to remind our readership of those who have fought for us.
The goal was to convince then North Carolina Governor Beverly Perdue, the only person legally authorized to sign pardons of innocence, to do so for a 40-year-old case. With the help of original Wilmington 10 defense attorneys James Ferguson and Irving Joyner, the North Carolina NAACP, Duke University historian Tim Tyson, Wilmington Journal journalist Cash Michaels as project coordinator, and others, Ms. Thatch was able to lead a national campaign that both revealed new and convincing evidence that the Wilmington 10 had been framed, and also garnered over 150,000 online petition signatures via change.org and the national NAACP, in addition to strong editorial support from the New York Times, several North Carolina newspapers, and even MSNBC. Then, on December 31st, 2012, Governor Perdue, in one of her last official acts in office, signed 10 pardons of innocence for the Wilmington 10.
Another governor may have done it, another governor may not have done it. But this is one of those instances when fate, I believe, put the right person at the right place at the right time, both in your group and how you approached this appeal, this pardon request, and in the citizenry around the state. There was some opposition from real people. There was some support from the press and folks outside of North Carolina. So this was a live political issue. But at the end of the day, this was 7 people's lives. 3 were already dead, as you've said. This was Ben Chavis and 6 other people who had, in my opinion, in my humble opinion, been wrongfully tried and convicted and had lived a life with this taint of the Wilmington 10s being found guilty. I just thought it was wrong, and I'm proud of the decision. It gives me great hope at the end of the day that right does win out.
On January 5th, 2013, the surviving members of the Wilmington 10 were all given their signed certificates of pardons of innocence, meaning that after 40 years, they were all legally free of the false charges from their 1971 convictions. Mary Alice Jervay Thatch, publisher-editor of the Wilmington Journal, was roundly applauded by her community for a job well done. The following year, Ms. Thatch won the Publisher of the Year award from NNPA and helped co-produce a film on the Wilmington 10. In the years that followed, Miss Thatch continued in the tradition of her father, Thomas C. Jervay Sr., staunchly advocating for Wilmington's black community through hard-hitting stories in her paper. Sadly, at the age of 78, Miss Thatch died of an undisclosed illness in December 2021, leaving behind her devoted husband, Reverend John L. Thatch, 3 loving daughters, and other adoring family members. But in the wake of her passing, Mary Alice Jervay Thatch was heralded by newspapers across the world as a tireless black publisher-editor who not only won justice for the Wilmington 10, but also used the power of the black press to advocate for much-needed social change wherever and whenever she could. Those of us who worked with Mary Alice loved her dearly and miss her tremendously. And that's why Mary Alice Jervay Thatch is a special figure in North Carolina history.